At Making Medicine, we're reporting on the headlines, not making medical recommendations. For personal health questions, always consult a doctor. Nothing in this episode constitutes investment, financial, or legal advice, and please consult your own advisors before making decisions. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Making Medicine podcast, where science, policy, and innovation meet. As always, I'm your host, John Stanford. This week, we were joined by special guest Bill Newell, who was recently served as Sutro's Chief Executive Officer from 2009 to earlier this year in 2025. He's got a lengthy career of experience that we get into the show, and has even been an advocate testifying before Congress and has leadership roles at a number of trade associations. He's just the right person to talk about today's policy environment. So with that, let's get into the show. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Delighted to be here.
Well, our listeners' number one ask is always about people's paths into the industry and then paths navigating industry. And with so many people coming from the investment community or the scientific community, let's start by saying what led you into the biotech industry and what were some of the pivotal decision points along the way that went into your years leading Sutro?
You know, I had a prior career before getting into the industry. I was a corporate lawyer representing companies in a variety of different industries. And I felt like I was not fully realizing the full potential of an impact that I could make as an attorney. And in the Bay Area, which is where I live, the biotech industry really offers people a mission-driven business model. And somebody with a legal background, not a scientific background, but a legal background, can play a very important role in the development of companies and in the medicines that those companies make. And so I would say I was drawn to the industry because I felt like my skill set could help in a way that I couldn't as a lawyer. My skill set could help others make medicines that reach patients and have a profound benefit on their lives. So that was really the primary motivation. I had the benefit of working alongside some great CEOs early in my career in the industry. I've been in the industry for 27 years. And I didn't start as a CEO, but in 2009, I had the opportunity to become the CEO of Sutro Biopharma. Sutro Biopharma at that point was a 19-person company, early stage venture financed, and had a disruptive platform technology, cell-free protein synthesis, that we thought could offer a way to make better medicines for patients. And so the challenge, and this was in 2009, was how do you keep capital in the company? How do you keep raising capital? How do you figure out what you should do with your platform technology? How do you find partnerships that realize full value for the company? And then how do you make a medicine when a company that is a platform company really doesn't know how to make medicines? And so those were some of the challenges that we had to work our way through. Now, you don't work your way through those overnight. It's a progression. And I was privileged to lead Sutro for 16 years as CEO. And, you know, around the end of my time at Sutro, we had about 350 employees and we had 2 pivotal phase 3 trials ongoing. And so it's a series of steps you take along the way, and you need a little luck, and you need good science, and you need to have a rationale for why your medicine is going to be impactful. And if you have that, then I think you have the wherewithal to make a difference in patients' lives. And that was really my raison d'etre for being in the industry.
Which I think is a good call out, because I would say some of the, use the word mission driven. You probably could have gone on to be successful in any sector, but you picked this one. And I think that's something that gets lost. And another thing that gets lost that I want to spend some time with is, I think if we went to the layman and said, I want you to have a conversation with Bill about his 16 years running Sutro, I think in the layman's head, they'd say but it must have been 5 or 6 drugs that came out during that time. And the reality is that billion plus later, still moving forward on these incredible assets, but not across the finish line yet. And I would just like your perspective, because people shortchange just how long, a career-long effort to even bring one medicine forward. So I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
No, you're absolutely right. I think Sutro is one of the more fortunate companies because we were able to move very far down that pathway. A lot of companies never get that far and they run out of capital. We raised through financings and through partnerships about $1.6 billion during my tenure as CEO of Sutro. And even at that lofty level, we still did not have the wherewithal to get a drug, a medicine across the finish line because even more capital was required. Now, that medicine that was in phase 3 was first studied in the clinic in 2019. So 6 years from entry into the clinic, you're starting a pivotal trial. And, in our industry, phase 3 trials are not 100% successful. As a matter of fact, the success rate is about 50%. So along the way, we had to build the platform technology. We had to build a manufacturing capability, even though we didn't have a product to sell yet. We had to hope that our science was right and that this medicine would actually benefit women with ovarian cancer, as well as a very rare form of pediatric AML. And we had to find ways to capitalize the company. And that is a very expensive, long, high-risk undertaking. And whenever I actually have a chance to talk to people about it, especially members of Congress, I let them know that this industry is fundamentally different than any other industry in the United States, and it's vital. It's a vital strategic industry for the United States. But you need to understand why we're different and the capital requirements and the risks that investors are asked to take, that your partners are asked to take, and then you ask your employees to take. It's not for the faint of heart, but it has an ultimate goal of improving the lives of individuals who are suffering from serious diseases.
That last point there about employees, next week I'm heading off to Japan to meet with some of their sort of ministers about what it would take for them to have a more robust ecosystem. And one of the points there about their labor protections, which are very a key part of sort of their culture, but they don't allow people to grow and shrink and grow and shrink. And so, for a biotech, if you miss on a data point, you might have to substantially reduce the workforce. And then as things heat back up or you get some good data, you scale very quickly. And so that's always sort of been an anathema that, do you think you could have led the company if you didn't have the flexibility of your size of workforce? I'd be curious if reducing that headcount is a critical thing to make it through such a long period.
Capital is so vital to any biotechnology company, and capital seems to come in waves. There were times when there was an abundance of capital, and there were times when capital was pretty hard to come by. And you have to really navigate as you build a company, as you grow your portfolio, as you try to achieve a regulatory approval for your medicine. You really have to be mindful that at the end of the day, you can only do what the capital you have allows you to do. And so if it comes to a point in time where you don't have adequate capital, then you have to make a tough decision, which is we'll have to trim back, we're going to have to focus, and we're going to have to, unfortunately, let some people who are doing very good work have to go and find another position. And that's a difficult decision to make, but it's fundamentally important that you be able to make that decision, because otherwise you'll run the company into the ground. And if you run the company into the ground, no patient benefits at all. So it's a tension and one that you have to take seriously and have a long view of so that you can avoid that to the maximum extent possible. But as you know, many, many companies in the biotechnology industry over the last 3 or 4 years have had to trim their work staff, had to focus down on a particular asset or two. And Sutro, by the way, is no exception to that. So it's It's part of the era that we're living in right now, but it's a reality of the industry that we're a little bit like an accordion. Sometimes we can pull it out, but then there are other times when you have to press it back in.
The tough decisions aren't appreciated. That market-based forces, and I know you've had some of these conversations with Congress, and we'll get into that in a second. But from some stakeholders' perspective, there's just this glut of funding, and if that were true, why would we have to make tough choices? Why would we have to leave somewhat promising assets on the shelf and really say, look, all we can afford is being laser focused on this one or two programs that we're doing? Now, you took over in 2009, certainly not a great time in the economy. The biotech economy the last several years has been very tough. How do you compare the two windows of really challenging fundraising times? And did lessons coming out of 2009 allowed you to shepherd Sutro from, say, 22 to 25 that a lot of biotechs haven't made it?
Yeah, I think the 2009 was not a great time to be raising capital. I was fortunate that the investors who had seeded the company in the early venture rounds believed in the promise of the technology and gave me enough money to last for 18 months and try and focus the company in that 18 months on something that could ultimately grow to and achieve what we did at Sutro. But the key question you really always have to bear in mind is, how do I make certain that I have the right people doing the right job at the right time? And do they always have to be employees, or can they be consultants where we have some flexibility? And then how do we look at programs? I'm going to use this word ruthlessly because I think that's what you have to do. You have to say, is this good enough? Is this going to make a difference in patients? Yes, there is risk all along the way, but you have to be very clear-sighted in the opportunity and not see it with rose-colored glasses, but really make certain that you have fully understood to the best of your ability what that medicine is capable of doing and whether it's worth continued investment. Because even if you believe that, you then need to persuade others who are going to give you capital to believe that too. And so, by being hard on the programs to ensure that they're making a difference, you give yourself the best opportunity to continue to raise that next amount of capital that gets you to the next milestone.
In addition to navigating all of these challenges of being a CEO, and I think they inform the question I'm about to ask, you've also worn the advocacy hat very heavily through organizations. You've testified before Congress. You've regularly met with these folks. The topic du jour for the last couple years is, should we be embracing price controls from a access and affordability standpoint? And, in the IRA, those price controls manifest themselves after 9 and 13 years. We've talked a lot about that. This most favored nation concept that President Trump is putting out there, they're all different shades of price controls that would not let the market set a price, but let the government set a price. I'm curious, in a world of price controls, what are the consequences of saying we're going to put a price control on Sutro's eventual product? How would that play out on hiring, the go, no-go of programs, trial design, and even your ability to recruit investment or partners?
I used the word ruthless before, and I'm going to use it again here. The capital markets are ruthless. And if you see a medicine that's a potential benefit to patients, you have to have thought through how much it's going to cost to develop it, how much it's going to cost to commercialize it, how you're going to do those things. Are you doing it alone? Are you doing it in collaboration with a partner? Or are you handing it off to a partner to allow them to do that? You have to ask yourself, what's the ultimate return on investment at the end of the day? And the market is ruthless about all of those things. Now, the good news is, and Sutro, like many other companies, had some marvelous partnerships with companies like Merck, Stellus, um, Celgene back in the day, and others that we were very proud of. And they provided the lion's share of the capital, that $1.6 billion that I referred to. Our partners provided the lion's share of that capital. Now, where did that money come from? That came from the profits that they made in the selling of the medicines that they were out there selling. And if you put price controls on the industry, what's going to happen is there's going to be less profitability for those pharmaceutical partners, which means they'll have less money to invest in companies like Sutro and in medicines like the ones we were delivering, which means I have less money to be able to do things. Instead of doing a pipeline of 5 or 6 programs, which is what we had, as I was ending my term as CEO, you might have a pipeline of 2 programs. Now, there's no reason why you should have that constraint on you. And I am very worried that to the extent price controls come into play, the market will discount the potential economic opportunity that an investment in a company like Sutro represents, and discount it in such a way that you frustrate our ability to actually do the work that's required to demonstrate that this medicine has value to patients and that it's got a good safety profile given the underlying condition that you're trying to address. So I can't think of anything worse than price controls. Now, we can argue about access and affordability. I think there are ways that they can be handled different from price controls, but fundamentally, capping what you can charge for a medicine is a recipe for disaster, and really will drive many companies into the swirl where you swirl down into oblivion.
There are 3 pieces of that really great answer that I want to just sort of restate on. One is, we get the sense, I'm curious if you picked up on this in your times coming to Washington, or I know you do some work in California on advocacy, the idea that you can beat up on big pharma but preserve small biotech. It's funny, some policymakers put them in 2 camps, and I think your point of, hey, these R&D partners that were coming in, Merck, Astellas, others, they're in the large pharma camp. But the partnerships that they enable and they put their funds into directly develop this not small, mid-sized biotech of 350 people in Sutro. And so, one, it's just another great example that that's not true. But there were kind of two death knells price controls offer. One is, if you price control drugs now that the large pharmas have out there and you cap their profit, you are capping their ability to do these R&D partnerships with small biotech. But you're also telling the investors, separate from the large pharmas, hey, this may not be worth it down if it all works out and they start selling a product or get acquired, it may not be worth what you needed it to be for your NPV. So 2 actually distinct threats posed by that. Is that a fair way to say it back to you?
That's exactly right, John. Yeah, you got it 100%. That's not appreciated well by policymakers and members of Congress. That's just not appreciated. And our job is to do a good job of communicating that.
Well, I think this conversation here today, we're going to make sure it gets in front of a handful of them. I want to do a quick round robin. You've been very generous with your time. Another one you've spoken out on is the importance of intellectual property. We're at a very strange world of intellectual property proposals, including a concept of percentages of equity or patent fees or others coming out of our Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. These seem a little far-flung and not fully baked, I'll just say it. But if they were put in place, what are the consequences of weakening IP or increasing patent equity or patent fees? How do you see those playing out or having consequence?
I think those are incredibly bad ideas. And let me give you a few reasons for that. One is In order to raise capital, investors need certainty, and they need certainty on your intellectual property. Because if you can just take someone's intellectual property away prematurely, then the value of my investment in creating that intellectual property gets reduced dramatically. And why would I do that? Secondly, I think that I've seen instances where people have a really interesting product concept, the medicine concept, but there's no intellectual property protection for that. And it may be a very good medicine. Guess what happens? No one gets that medicine because it never gets developed, even though it should. But there's nobody to step in when you can't make any money on selling a medicine because there's no protection for it. Thirdly, we pay patent fees all the time. It's a well-established regime, and it's predictable, and we know what we pay in the United States, we know what we pay in Europe, we know what we pay in Japan. All of that is well understood. But to try and extort a company because it's got a patent that could be valuable someday is just ridiculous. I mean, Sutro was founded in 1983. And so some of our patents go way back then. And, to be charging exorbitant fees on patents that were foundational to the company is just a recipe for disaster and a recipe to blow up the whole industry. So, I think half-baked is the best way you can characterize those ideas. And I think they're just not worthy of real consideration.
Well, price controls IP concerning like to leave on a positive note. You get the magic wand of policy making. Is there a change at FDA, at CMS, in the process more broadly? Is there something you wish could change that would speed up development or increase access? What would you do proactively to sort of benefit this space?
I'm going to say that I wish I had 50 magic wands because there's so many things to point the magic wand at. The pill penalty, for example, is one. But let me tell you what I think we need to make certain of. And that really has to do with FDA. We need consistent policy and review procedures at FDA. And when you change the team there in dramatic ways, consistency is at risk. And if you don't know what the game is going to be when you get in front of a regulatory body, you're very much playing with fire and not giving investors and not giving your medicine the full opportunity to achieve its regulatory approval if it's successful in development. I think the other thing that the agency has started to do and then backtracked on was understand that there should be pathways for accelerated approval under certain circumstances. And that was a really foundational change in the way FDA gave companies an opportunity to develop cancer medicines and other medicines. But I see backtracking on that. And I see that as dangerous because a number of medicines are desperately needed by patients. And if we can use surrogate endpoints as a way to establish the benefit and the safety of the medicine, then I think that's a reasonable basis to give the company an opportunity to sell that medicine and allow for continued clinical development of it to establish a more robust data set. Cancer trials, which rely on overall survival at the end of the day, take a long time to read out. Now, if you've got good surrogates that suggest the patient is benefiting and that their disease is under control, why wouldn't we want to give that medicine available to patients while we take the time to understand the long-term benefit of that? Now, not every medicine is going to pan out. And what happens in that instance is the medicine then gets pulled or additional work needs to be done before that medicine can really be more broadly available. So I think if FDA could really embrace the accelerated approval process and understand that more development work will be necessary, and not only do it in cancer, but for other diseases as well, because we're better able to assess and understand surrogate endpoints, I think that would be a great benefit to the industry and a great benefit to patients.
You know what? I'm going to cheat. I said that was the last one, but I just want to go back to something you said on IP. I'm curious what you think of this. A lot of anti-IP advocates point out the occasional medicine from 100 years ago that wasn't patented, or the patent was given away, and that's what we should be doing when we stumble across these things. I think we need to offer some clarity, and so I'm curious how you react to this statement. It still costs $1 billion or $2 billion because the FDA takes long. You have to do these trials and that. If the IP isn't around, if we gave it away to society, we listen to some of these provocateurs and say, you know what? We found something interesting. We're going to give it away. Do you think that drug would ever get developed?
No, the answer is it would not. But let me just go back and make sure people understand. When I get a patent, that gives me the exclusive right to make that medicine for a defined period of time. When that period of time runs, and that's not forever, when that period of time runs, any other company can use the understanding that was demonstrated in that patent to make a competitive molecule. That's what the whole generics industry and biosimilar industry are based on. So our drugs do effectively go out of our control and to a lower cost developer after the patent period runs. But if you knew from the day you got your medicine approved that a generic company could come in and make that medicine and undercut you without having put in the investment to develop that medicine, to manufacture that medicine, no one would invest in medicines under those circumstances. It's just an untenable situation.
Well, we'll have to do our job of steering policymakers to the good ideas you had here, maybe shelve some of their half-baked ideas. Bill, I am so grateful of the time that you took away. You have such a career's worth of experience that we've leaned into for this episode. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and keep up the good fight.
That's all for this week's episode of the Making Medicine podcast. A special thank you to Bill Newell again for joining us today and providing some incredible insights for our listeners. Have a thought or question about today's topics? Drop a comment and we'll feature it in next week's episode. Speaking of next week, Making Medicine is going global. We'll sit down in Tokyo with some of the leading life science investors after they spend a week with us visiting leaders of the ecosystem in Japan. You'll not want to miss this one, so don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram using the links in the description. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Bill. And as always, keep innovating.